RenderCon?
I had the best day of my life.
AI.
It's an art dies. Like that's crazy, and that sucks.
Render anything.
Yes.
What changed in your life?
The render network is bigger than all of that.
I'm using it too.
I love it.
This is what they call my next guest needs no introduction. Jules Urbach, the CEO of OTOY, legend, living legend.
Thank you, sir.
Jules, thank you for inviting us.
It's a pleasure to have you here.
It's a highlight of my career, I would say.
Well, likewise. I mean, I know so much about your storied career and all of the great work that you've been doing with Octane and promoting OTOY and the render network. And building amazing tools and tooling and products and art with it. So
it's only fair to say that I owe my channel to your tools. Really, it skyrocketed from Cinema 4D and Octane.
We're grateful to be a part of your journey and to help you any way we can. And very, very fun to talk about the Octane story, and also, of course, to hear from artists about how it's used and how it's changed their workflows, what it's done for the better. And also, of course, as always, how can we improve it? How can we make the experience for artists better? And of course, talking about the new technology that we're all excited about and that we're putting into the next version, and also just things that are there to improve the quality of life for the existing set of tools that are out there.
For the past year, me and my team, we were privileged to be sponsored by OTOY and the foundation, the Render Network. We worked on improving Octane presence in Houdini. There's a huge success on that front. If you haven't seen it, go watch my video, and we will keep enhancing that functionality. So by the end of that collaboration, right now, we've been invited to LA to attend RenderCon. I think, Jules, it was a huge success. It actually was an unexpected conference for me. In a good way. There was a huge concentration of fantastic people that I met, tech, artists. Does it mean that it will be now a yearly event for you?
Oh, yeah. Well, my experience was also that it was unexpected because we had never hosted a conference. I love GTC. I've been giving talks there for 15 years. SIGGRAPH, but it was just getting crowded, and to the point where Richard Karras from NVIDIA, who's at our event at RenderCon, was saying this GTC is not so much about rendering. So RenderCon sort of came out of that. I had the best day of my life, like just in terms of conferences. It was amazing, and it was amazing to hear from artists saying, I just felt there haven't been that many conferences about art for artists, and we had that. We had a lot of Octane artists, Symphony artists, Houdini artists, Blender artists, that were there talking about their craft, and we support that. And then the conference itself it was eclectic. I had a panel on UFOs. I brought in Ari Emanuel, who is my owns UFC and runs WME. We had, of course, a lot of stuff on AI as it relates to filmmaking and the future, pro and con, right? But it was a huge success. So we are definitely doing it again next year, and hopefully every year, because I think there's a place for it. The question is, do we do it in April after NAB? Yeah, maybe that's a good slot for it. But man, I loved it. I had the best time, and I booked 7 hours of talks almost nonstop from the morning, and by the end of it, I had more energy than at the beginning because of people's enthusiasm and how I just saw the group sort of react to everything that we were doing. It was a great experience.
I'm actually super happy to hear that you enjoyed it and everything went beyond your expectations.
It did.
Because my team here behind the camera, they have no relation directly to CG, and they enjoyed it a lot.
So good.
Does it mean that you will stop announcing Octane updates at GTC and SIGGRAPH now and use only this platform for updates?
Oh, no. I mean, I think that, first of all, a year is a long time, right? So there's a lot of things. Octane typically follows a pattern where around November, Black Friday, typically, where there's already a sale and everything. We show new versions of the software. We put out new versions. That'll probably remain that way for a while. And I'm planning to attend SIGGRAPH in Vancouver this year, and I expect to be able to show more stuff. I just think RenderCon is the densest, most concentrated form of us being able to put out our messaging. I will say that GTC this year, it's the first time I didn't directly give a talk. I just attended Richard Karras' talk, and we sort of decided, well, we're going to continue this conversation at RenderCon. Let's have you start it here. But as I was saying, I mean, GTC is just blown up. I mean, NVIDIA is blown up. It's a multi-trillion-dollar company, and so much of that of the interest in GTC is dispersed. You just don't see the same level of panels on rendering. It used to be that there was a rendering panel, right, with me and Vlado and the Redshift guys and the Arnold guys. And like that just went away, you know, it's in the last couple of years. So I want to make sure that RenderCon exists I probably shouldn't invite more people. I wanted to make sure this first one went well before I was like, you know, everyone come in and join. But it did. So I think we're going to still, you know, be announcing stuff and doing things at other places. But I think the weight of what we do show and any sort of breakthrough things will probably be at our conference. I think that makes the most sense. It'll also be a chance for others in the rendering space and the art space to really also have a conference dedicated to their craft. And I think that's just missing. I think even SIGGRAPH and NAB and IBC just don't quite have that same sort of artist-friendly culture. At least that's what I'm hearing from others' experiences, and that's sort of what I've seen myself.
That's what I felt. It's like, unlike any other conference, this one felt really artist-centric, and not just artist-centric, because we've been to other conferences for the past year, like Blender conference, we've been to IBC, FMX.
And I have gone at the Blender conference, and I'm speaking there again this year. I will be at the Blender conference.
We will actually get back to Blender, because it's a huge topic, because there's a huge audience, and Octane recently received huge updates on Blender front. The big part of your keynote was AI. Obviously a hot topic. My takeout was that you are, I'll call it, on the correct side about UI, that it's supposed to empower artists rather than trying to replace them.
It's definitely not a conversation that ends with my talk. It was really, that was more just me setting, you know, I spent a lot of time. I mean, I spent up until the talk, like the last few months of this year, I've tried every single generative video service. I even showed in my talk, there's a slide, here's 20 different, you know, takes on these things, and they don't work. I mean, I did this beautiful structure piece with a team. We couldn't use anything for that. Like it just, 720p isn't going to cut it. But what's happening is that you're starting to see that, and the thing that I showed in my talk that I'm most proud of is that I can take something that's generated, I can bring it into Octane, and I can move it around like an object, and I can relight it like a normal object, and then that becomes an asset. It doesn't become a whole new workflow. And you know, some of the other pieces that we were showing were that, you know, some of the things like Tripo and Trellis and those things, they're getting a little better at generating meshes. And I think that AI has a huge part to play. I mean, if people remember, when we shipped, it was Octane, I think 308, maybe it was in 2017, we shipped an AI denoiser in Octane. That was AI, right? Nobody complained then. Nobody complained about the upsampler. What people are gassed about, including me, by the way, is I don't want somebody to type a piece of text in and get back something, and then everyone loses their jobs and art dies. Like that. That's crazy, and that sucks. And I think that there's going to be a lot of generated content where that's all you're going to get, and meme content, things like that. But when it comes to production, when it comes to quality, I mean, you know, the human eye, the artistic intent is such a huge part of it. And I think there were people that were artists that came in the beginning of RenderCon, that were just like super against anything with AI, and they're not wrong, because there's some bad stuff that can come from the way that it could be applied, or the way that people might look at it. But by the time you sort of see that there's a better pipeline, or at least an improved pipeline at the other side of this, then I think you might flip. And I think, you know, when I was interviewing Beeple, right, he was one of my one of the panels I hosted, I kind of knew, I know what tools he uses. I know he uses Kriya. I know he uses, you know, for basic generating models and Magnifique, whatever, for upsampling, things like that. But for him, it's like, you know, and like many artists, you want precision. You just don't want to leave it into a slot machine.
Control.
Right? And the slot machine approach is like, even if you're again using Kling 2.0 came out yesterday. I mean, obviously in the AI space, things change every moment. It takes 10 generations to get the shot you want. That's not really how art should work. It should be a lot more precise. And I think that our goal is, let's take the best of what you can use for generative AI. Let's see if you can generate an asset or a piece or a part or some sort of element in this thing, or, you know, give some sort of element that can still be fully controlled. And that's the workflow that I think we're doubling down on, and I feel very good about that. Where I do think that you're going to see some strange stuff is you have the CTO of Paramount, right? And we work with Paramount very closely. He went to South by Southwest, and he said, well, the good news is we can get rid of this roto artist, and but who knows? You know, like we probably have AI come up with, stories and ideas, and it's like, that stuff to me is a lot more fraught with danger and honestly with a lot less of an understanding of the human element. I mean, art by humans for humans is really important. One of my slides was Donald Langley, head of Universal, saying exactly those words, because as long as you don't forget that, I think there's a path that makes sense. The part where AI is being trained on all of our art and data that's a problem. It's a huge problem. But the problem, the bigger problem is the cat's out of the bag. I mean, Singapore and China have zero laws on IP rights. Like if you run Kling or you train in China on all the Marvel movies and put that in Kling, there's nothing that stops. I mean, there's no law in China against that, right? And Kling can be accessible to anyone in the world. I mean, yes, Europe's trying to create laws against that. But I just think that that's not necessarily even the end result. I think that the pipeline where you have precision in your scene and you're still rendering, and AI could be used for parts of that, or it's ethically trained, that has a lot of value. And we shouldn't throw all that out because of bad actors or bad, I guess, modalities of how this could be abused. And I think that those are all sort of separate issues. But by the end of my talk, once you go out and you see it from me, and I think the path towards a healthy ecosystem where AI is a useful tool for the kind of workflows we do is pretty much laid out.
Yeah, you showed quite good examples, sir.
Thank you.
At IBC, it was announced that Redshift and Cinema are supported natively. Shortly after that, we seen Blender beta supported natively on the render network.
Oh, yeah.
And Houdini is in the talks.
Oh, yeah.
So would that mean that render network has the power enough to render anything?
Yes. The idea is obviously Octane is my baby, and I love it. But and I've said many times, but renders and OTOY, of course, created. But the render network is bigger than all of that. I mean, from the very beginning, what people may not realize is that before Redshift was even acquired by Maxon, I was talking to Panos and Nick and Rob and those guys about bringing Redshift onto the render network. This was like 2017 practically,
Yeah.
And they were acquired in 2019, right? So I've always had the goal of bringing in Arnold and Redshift and all this stuff. And of course, we can talk about Blender later, but I mean, Blender is 2 million artists. Like, I want them to be supported on the render network. So, I will say Octane scales perfectly. You have a 17 GPU rig, you're going to render it 17 times faster. And I don't know about another renderer that quite does that. But if Octane isn't your renderer of choice, the render network will support with Redshift, with Arnold, with Cycles. And that's fine. And we want to support all those things. We also want to support, if you want to send a Cinema 4D file or a .blend file, like those things can now work. It doesn't have to always be an ORBX file. And there are use cases for both. And what I realized is, the goal, I wear two hats. CEO of OTOY, founder of OTOY, there to make sure Octane Studio and all the subs and all the things we build there go well. But when it comes to the render network, it's its own organization. Render Foundation exists separately from OTOY. I may have started it, I may have founded it. I definitely provide a lot of the vision and direction for it. But there, my job is to make sure that we have as much. Those GPUs are always running, right? And we have more and more work that's being pushed to that network, because that's how the render economy works. The more that the jobs get run, the more the node operators make, the more everything is copacetic. And so for that, I think we just need more than just Octane. And we do need to consider workloads that are different than the ones that we started directly at OTOY. That doesn't mean that we're not already looking at other things. We're talking about AI, right? The workloads that you can use to generate something absolutely make sense in the render network too. And all of those things, I think will be blended into the workflows of the future. But I think that if there's a demand for a certain product, for Blender and Cycles or Redshift and anything, right, well then render network will provide that. And in fact, we actually worked out a pretty interesting, unique, bespoke deal with Maxon to get a special version of Cinema 4D that could load plugins, that could run on decentralized nodes. It took years, but we did it. And I'm very proud of that. And there's a lot of happy Redshift customers that get results back on the render network. And we'll keep doing that as much as is needed. I think with Houdini, there is Houdini engine. If we wanted to just skip the whole export process, we could look at that. And I think the work you're doing, frankly, with Houdini is eye-opening. The workflow tools you created to support render better with these massive scenes is awesome. And we want that, because as you're pointing out, the things that you used to use Clarisse, and I love those guys. And sadly, for those that don't know, Clarisse is no longer around. And sadly, one of the founders passed away. And yet it was a unique tool for the ability to generate these massive scenes. It was a CPU render. And I think you're like, I want Clarisse on the render network, the equivalent of that spiritually, maybe with Octane. And I think that you're onto something, right? With the workflows that you're developing, where you're splitting the these Houdini assets into these parts and assembling them on render, and it's efficient and it works and it's bypassing some of the friction or pain points. That's a big deal, and I want to see more of that.
Actually, I have genuine belief that Octane Standalone, with minor changes to
Huge.
can be.
I use Octane Standalone. That's my tool.
I'm using it too.
I love it. It's a fast. It's like direct mainlining to Octane. There's nothing between Octane and you in Standalone.
Because Clarisse Builder, that was node-based assembler.
Yeah.
That's what Octane is.
Yeah.
It removes all the pollution from DCCs. It's
I agree. That's why it exists.
Pure GPU power.
Yeah. It has a place, right? Although I think what you're getting at is with a little bit of work, it could be a better tool, right?
There's no work in core necessary, just UI.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I meant.
UX.
The UI is a mess, unfortunately. No timeline, right? But I mean, for me, I have to say that the way that I use Octane, and I use it all the time, is in Standalone, because there is no DCC between Octane and the user in Standalone. It's pure Octane. Now, granted, I mean, if you're modeling, if you're even doing animation, it's not great. But if you have the scene ready to go and you're changing materials or changing lighting, or you just want the most interactive experience possible, there's nothing quite beats that. And so I do feel like there's been all the different resources we have. I feel like a little bit of love for Standalone would go a long way towards making it an even better tool, even on the iPad, right? For prepping scenes, but also just for playing around with rendering. I mean, it's one of the fastest and most elegant ways of just experiencing Octane that there is. So I want to give that a little bit of love in the future as well. But it is how I generally use my own product.
Really nice. I'm using it too. It's actually, well, I said it in the video. I'm using Standalone in the ways that I never thought I would, but it works and we are onto something. So I started that conversation about Houdini, right? Because Octane already supports full USD and our tool now exports USD. And MtlX is coming in 2026.
It's shipping in a couple of months. In the alpha, I think MtlX is already supported.
Yeah. So in the long run, does it mean that the current shader set in Octane will become deprecated, or?
Hard to say. And that's the thing is, I was reading in the MoGraph Slack. There's some Slack channels, where they're like, well, even in you have MtlX, you have universal material, you've got standard surface. The truth is that we're not taking anything away. I mean, some people are very happy with the older workflows, and there are things that MtlX doesn't do explicitly that you still may want to do in the other ones, right? So taking things away, never a good idea. Now, if you want to have something that is a standard workflow where what you're authoring or what you're bringing in is the same in all renders, I mean, MtlX is there for that, right? That's why we support it. That's why Redshift supports it. That's why it's supported. And we're part of the Academy Software Foundation, right? So we're helping them add things that are missing. And I think that, it's right now in Octane 2026, you see how it works. There's a MtlX tab. All the nodes MtlX are there. Some of them are overlapped with our nodes. Some of them aren't. But you can mix them together, or you can stick to a MtlX only workflow. And I do think standards are important. I think that being able to take an asset, save an asset, or load an asset from a library is important. USD also as an interchange format makes a lot of sense. Orbex was built around exporting to a Leanbig or OBJ or FBX. USD kind of encompasses many of those things. Mm-hmm. And in the core of the engine, we're also adding a lot of the functionality that's in USD for stage actors and things like that, variants. All those things are fundamental, and they're not really in Octane core, but they will be shortly. And I think that MtlX and USD is a pretty decent workflow that has its place. But again, even supporting, for example, OpenPBR, which is Standard Surface 2.0, we're doing that. We'll keep the old Standard Surface in there. It's pretty close. But some people just have a workflow that they like. And I think that there's just always syntactical or user interface sugar, right, that can make one thing prominent versus the other, but you're not losing anything. I think taking things away, especially when people have been using Octane for a decade plus, never a great idea. So they'll be both in there for a while.
Okay, so it's essentially just a new shader. Basically.
Yeah, it's actually a new material type, and it'll be, and it is a new shader graphs, set of shader graphs that are a perfect recreation or perfect match to what the standard shaders are in MtlX. So if you're bringing MtlX objects in, they will look great. All the nodes will be there. If there's something MtlX that you're familiar with using and that's what you can just use that in Octane directly.
Cool. And in our toolset, we have MtlX to Octane converter already. Can do vice versa as well.
That's great.
Yeah.
And that's a place too, because obviously, this is brand new stuff. It hasn't even shipped yet, and we're also, I don't know if it does any conversion. It just supports the MtlX as an input graph, at least, into Octane objects.
There are some other really fantastic features coming in 2026, including Meshlets.
Yeah, finally.
And and streaming textures. So my question is, would those require RBX, or would you rather expand the DCC support on Render Network?
Well, I think so. Meshlets and the streaming texture should just work in any DCC. It is for those who are familiar with like how these things work. It's like nanite, right? Nanite in Unreal means you can basically you can take a giant ZBrush thing or giant terrain, and it basically sort of chunks it into LODs and it pulls it in as you move the camera around. That'll work in any of the DCCs. You just have to give it a mesh or the larger object, and it'll turn it into a meshlet stream. And that'll just work. That could be embedded in Orbex. It can be called from a Houdini or C4D integration. So it's not limited to Orbex. But I do think that the mesh stuff is huge because it just means that we can fit a lot more into GPU memory. Textures are the same way, and that's what Unreal's been doing for a while. That's what inspired this feature. But we've just put it again into a production render, and Octane being unbiased and all these things. I mean, the quality is awesome. And there's another feature in 26 that's looking really promising, which is the ability to load in Gaussian splats, right? Which is our first sort of test of like, we want to load in objects that are not VDBs or meshes. And Gaussian splats can be not just loaded in and rendered with other scene objects, but you can do ray tracing on them, making cast shadows. You can, we're going to work on making it so you can relight them and do material, operations on them, which is super cool.
What was the limit with Gaussian splatting? They can't receive or cast shadows?
Both of them are fixed in Octane. They can receive shadows and they can cast shadows now in 26, or at least in the nightly builds I have, they can do that.
Yeah, because the guys here today, we're in OTOY building. If you haven't figured that out,
yeah,
it's amazing. I've seen the scanners, the light stage, and it's mind blowing. It's like out of the movie. And the guys were showing me what they're testing with Gaussian splatting. It's a hologram, basically.
Yeah,
your vision about
of Lightfields, for example. So the funny part about Gaussian splatting is that it started off not as Gaussian splatting, but as neural radiance fields, which were effectively very close to Lightfields, which is what I was showing in SIGGRAPH 2014, 11 years ago. And we still have Lightfield support, so you can render those out. There's a shader. It works even as OSL. But the thing with Gaussian splats is it's become a pipeline. So you can take a NERF, which is a multidimensional, neural representation of learned object, and you can convert it into a splat, which is a bunch of ellipsoids with effectively spherical harmonics, reflection, so that it just looks like, as you said, a hologram. And you can load that in Octane, and I think V-Ray added support for it. There's also a plugin for C4D that doesn't quite get you the full Gaussian splats. Like this thing we got the full reflections, it's ray traced. It's a first step towards being able to take a neural object that is generated without turning it into anything else and just rendering that in the scene deterministically. But the Gaussian splats that we've added, I think one of the differences between the way we've done it in Octane and I think anyone else has done it so far is that, yes, those things can cast shadows on themselves, on other objects. You can also put lights on them. And we're moving further and further towards where you can start with, especially if we're generating the splats from, let's say, an Octane scene, because it's very fast, then those will also have the ability to be relit, deformed, animated. So I think that there's a whole future for this workflow, and generating Gaussian splats from Octane scenes is also super interesting because that could be used for virtual production. That could be used for more real-time use cases. Initially, that's where our Lightfield stuff was coming from, which brings us all the way back, of course, to real-time workflows, Brigade, even other things like that have been in the R&D pipeline for years, if not decades.
Yeah, I was going to this because it's one of the most popular users' questions, and I wanted to specifically discuss Brigade. My team, they're on Blender. Blender obviously have Eevee. V-Ray has
Vantage, yes.
Vantage, yeah. And my team, they made...
And Redshift has Redshift RT.
Redshift RT, yeah. My guys made some clients happy with quick renders, quick turnarounds, the speed, how they can visualize stuff, but it's never approved by me as a final result. So it's important to define what real time is for, because in our case, we're a commercial studio. It's never for final, for visualization, like several samples plus the noise. Octane, direct lighting or path tracing even, is enough. What's your take on this?
So I think when I get questioned about Brigade, what people don't understand is that I remember if you go back in 2018 and Octane 4, I was like, Octane ships with Brigade. What we started showing in Brigade was, I think, 2012. So it was about 6 years before then. And it was before there was any RTX hardware, right? Mm-hmm. Which was why it was special, because it was super fast. And it was noisy. It wasn't like, if you go back to those old videos, even when I had 80 GPUs or whatever, which now it's like 3,000 Octane bench, it was noisy, and it also wasn't Octane. I mean, it was much simpler scenes, right? And so along those things, I was like, let's take the best out of the Brigade code base and put it in Octane. And we did that. The Octane 4, you could finally move objects around, and it was super fast. That was one piece of it. And then as we went on over the years, the elements of Brigade got in there. And the thing that I realized is we put out something called Brigade Bench, which was literally Brigade as it was, a snapshot of it, and you could download it. And it was super fast. It would run 4K 60. We took, I think, the Japanese garden scene, which was a really famous Octane scene that won the award and everything. And you could load that, and to this day, you can still run it. And it was great. And I was showing in I think it was in my GTC 20 or 22 talks, various things around it. But when it came to the artist pipeline, when it came to starting to add materials that were in Octane, all the complexity of it, Brigade would start to slow down to Octane speed. And I was like, okay, screw this. Let's just get Octane to have all the rest of the Brigade code, keep the materials, and improve that. And what happened is that in Octane 2022, we shipped something that was really cool, which is the real-time mode. Now, what I guess hasn't happened is that hasn't percolated to the plugins. But if you use Octane Standalone and you hit that lightning button, and you go to 4K 60 and you're in direct lighting, you'll get 4K 60 frames per second. It's really fast. Dino was one of the first people to notice that. And he's like, well, why isn't this in C40? And it's because there's a frame buffer lag and all these things. So when you're in a DCC, unless it's Unreal, right, which we can, maybe feed at that speed, you're going to lose a lot of the latency and the speed. And more importantly, what I was starting to see is that we were putting technology in from Brigade, and people are like, where's Brigade? I'm like, well, you have 80% of it. The only thing that's really missing that's left is the temporal denoiser, right, which we were working on. And what happened with that, and when we were at Octane 2023, is we were testing it. I tested it in a closed beta group, and it was splotchy, And the thing is, the splotchiness was also heavy. It was slowing down the frames per second. And I was like, I'm not shipping this thing. Let's revisit it later. And what's interesting is that what we have just shipped, Octane 2025 ships with a GPU version of Odin. 26 will support Blackwell. And I'll send you guys the videos where people can do this themselves. But you could turn Odin on, put it in output AOV in Standalone. You'll get noise-free renders at 20 frames a second. Pretty good. Full octane, right? So my thinking is between that and Neural Radiance Cache, which we're adding in 2026, it's just better to get Octane to be as close to real time as possible. Hell, even if it's not at 60, even if it's at 24 frames a second, and focus on that. Because Octane itself has always been about real time, right? It's been noisy, but you can still move things around in the viewport, and improving that and making that faster, I think, has been helpful because of the RTX hardware support. NVIDIA's been adding more and more support for that, Apple as well. Yeah. So I think we're getting to the world where I think the best bet has been to double down on Octane and make that as real time as possible. And most of Brigade is in Octane. It's just my decision was not to simplify Octane or simplify a second render just to get you to 60 frames per second. Because to me, the use case for that, while there is one, which is, I think, games and workflows that are used in virtual production, there's ways around that. What we were talking about with turning things into a Gaussian splice, just flip that switch on and bring that back in Octane, and you'll have something that's very close to real time or usable for virtual production. So I think that unless there's a real need to split the renderer off into a totally separate path, I think doubling down on GPU speed, on frankly, new technology like Neural Radiance Cache, which significantly reduces noise. We're even doing frame interpolation, so even if it's rendering at 24, it'll give you smooth 60, right? That's what DLSS does for games. Those things feel like the right bet, and I'm glad we didn't spend or divert our attention into something that would have taken away from that path happening as quickly as possible for Octane.
Yes. So the takeaway is that was my revelation that I mentioned, Standalone. That's the purest Octane, and you can get to real time. And actually, it's probably safe to say that we will roll out the toolset that we made for Houdini, for Cinema 4D and Blender to ease out, export of whatever you have to export, and then use the purest version of Octane. That's where you will get the speed.
And honestly, before people worry about how fast Octane's, try it in Standalone, try your scene in Standalone, and turn on that lightning button. and see what happens. I mean, I've seen some people that have been, Dino is one example, but some people are surprised at how well that works. And that also is part of it. I mean, it's like if you're within a DCC, I mean, and the DCC doesn't support, the ability to update, the frames per second, right? The scene graph itself at 4K 60, what do you do? So I think that that's also one of the things that makes real time a little tricky. Is it depends what tool you're using it in. In Standalone, there's nothing but the renderer. So that's why it's a great tool for real time and for certainly look dev. I mean, that's where a lot of people kind of, I think, find some use for it.
Standalone is a truly state of art engine, Octane. Render Network has everything from 12 gigs to 96 gigs, but for freelancers and consumers and prosumers, it's currently at 32 gigs with 5090. Silicon versus CUDA. Who do you think will win?
What do you mean?
Yeah.
We supported AMD and Intel GPUs in 2020 with Octane X on Metal, right? And so it's not like we haven't explored every type of hardware out there. We're using like Imagination Technologies, hardware ray tracing 2016. It's come down to, if you want a high-end, high-powered GPU, it's NVIDIA. If you want something that runs in a laptop or lower, right? Because we support, believe it or not, Octane runs pretty great on an iPhone or an iPad. iPad app is out. It's Apple. I mean, it's just, and the thing is, listen, I have a 5090 laptop and I've got an, M4 Max Pro. I use the M4 Max Pro all the time because it lasts all day. Yeah. And I can bring it anywhere. I bring it on the plane, and I love the Mac, right? I use the 5090 when I can plug it into the wall and I get even more power, but it's not that much faster. I mean, it's maybe, the 5090 laptop is not the same as a 5090 desktop.
Definitely.
So it's like they're just two different pieces, and we support both of these. Now, I will say one thing. On the Apple side, my GPU on my M4 Max Pro has 128 gigs of RAM. There's no such thing on the NVIDIA side with that much memory. There's a 96 gig GPU that NVIDIA put out, the RTX Pro, and if you are on PCI Gen 5, you put two of those in there, you can do an NVLink kind of thing and get to 192 gigs combined, which is pretty good. On the other side, you get a Mac M3 Ultra, 512 gigs of video memory. So you have these things where it's like, I mean, there are pluses and minuses of both, but the memory on the Apple side is pretty remarkable. And I think that's something that is, I mean, again, 512 gigs is probably more than most people even imagine using for a lot of productions, but 128 gigs isn't. And that's kind of the sweet spot. So I think that NVIDIA with the RTX Pro cards is addressing that a little bit better. But I do think we should be at higher than 32 gigs for VRAM. I just think that would be helpful. But there's also mitigation strategies around that. Meshlets are a big part of that. Neural textures and compression could be another. I just think that there's a really nice spectrum from low power, high speed at low power to power doesn't matter, and it's NVIDIA from there. And those two things connect pretty nicely at the middle. So it's really only the laptop space where I think people need to make a decision as to what they want, what they want to get. But I will say that a lot of people, since Apple Silicon sort of matured, and they use a laptop and they use a Mac laptop, and that's been a big part of people's workflows. And I think if anybody that's on the desktop has pretty much gone NVIDIA PC, So I think that one thing that I've seen is Apple has definitely made the effort to support everything that CUDA has, even though it's metal shading language. Hardware-wise, they've added, hardware ray tracing support. They've added neural things that are equivalent to TPU. There's nothing missing at this point between these two things. It's really just about which kind of level of power versus speed you want to get. I will say that Apple has incredible performance per watt. And I think that most people using NVIDIA hardware just don't care about the performance per watt. They just care about the performance, right? And the fact that you can, there's no way on an Apple device to put, there is no multi-GPU, right, at all. Apple just doesn't support that anymore. So you want more than the 5090 speed PC or that kind of framework is the only way to get there. And I think there are use cases for both. I have both. I have a workstation, a MacBook, a PC 5090, and I use them in different ways. But I will say most of my time I spend on my Mac laptop because I can bring it with me everywhere and I can just work anywhere on it. And I think Apple's done a great job. I think where it's harder for me to sort of justify, like, do we want to invest in Qualcomm GPUs? Do we want to invest in AMD GPUs? Which we've supported. It's just the software stack for AMD GPUs has been a bit dicey. They've had like sort of, we built multiple things where the drivers were just tricky. We could do it, but I have to say that, it's sort of where we're at now, where we support Apple great and we support NVIDIA really well on PC and Linux and so on. It feels like it's a good spot and that we've invested our resources wisely. And if there were some amazing sort of GPU that came out of AMD or anyone else, like we'd absolutely, we can port it. So it's just interesting to see how these things play out. And I don't see NVIDIA going super into the low end, in the tablet space, particularly the phone space. And I don't see Apple necessarily even making an effort to support the kind of hardware where you have, more than one GPU, for example, in a system. Even Apple's single GPU is pretty good. So yeah, they sort of connect in this complementary spectrum.
I would opt for Silicon Mac because of the memory, unified memory. I can fit anything in there, and Render Network can handle it. And my curiosity, I'll be honest, lies into building a full Mac environment. Full Mac.
Oh, we want to do it. I mean, I haven't been coy about it. I mean, we've even thought about doing it on the iPad. The iPad is an M4, which is not bad, Octane bench-wise. So it is something where obviously anything that we can run Octane on, or run any of the rendering network stuff on, could be a node. And I think Apple, in particular, with the Mac Minis and the Mac Ultra, the M3 Ultra that's in the Studio Mac, those could be great nodes. I absolutely want to do that. It's just, again, I think part of what we've been focused on in the render network is I think we want to make sure that what we already have launched is stable and works well, and there's some missing frames or glitches or things like that. And I think once we're through that, a bit more of that, then I want to get the Mac going pretty quickly, because I do think that that's a huge opportunity for us. And to be fair, you're right. I mean, there are memory footprints on the Mac that don't exist anywhere else on any other platform. So, and there's going to be a lot of Mac studios out there. There's millions of people we know that are using, that have a good GPU on a Mac system that could be powering the render network. So, it's definitely on the horizon. I want to be careful about time frames, because it's the easiest thing to predict something and then miss that date, as people might know. I've done that myself, Octane 3. But that was 10 years ago. But I think that once we do get through, I think some of the artist workflow issues, I think the Mac is a very important platform, and I think Apple's helped themselves significantly by putting out the 512 gig Mac Studio. That's a rare beast. That's something that I'd love to see that in artist hands, but also on the network itself.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. That's pretty much everything I wanted to discuss technically. But Jules, I'm not sure if you've seen my other interviews with Ton. For example, I'm inspired by people like Ton.
I am too. I love Ton. Oh my God, I can talk about him for a bit.
He's inspirational, isn't he?
So here's the thing. I basically had a cigarette party here, across the street from our office, and I don't know. I invited Ton. Maybe he'll show up, maybe not. He shows up, and we get along great. I mean, he comes to the office, and it's clear that we think alike. I don't think necessarily exactly like him, because obviously, what he's done with Blender and how he's built that system and how he's kept it open source, and that the vision that he has is it's not mine, but I'm on board. I think it's amazing. So he invited me to speak at the Blender conference, which I did in 23, I think, which was a year and a half ago, and we've developed a really close relationship with the Blender Foundation. We're committed serious money and resources, right? We're one of their big sponsors the last 2 years, and we're going to keep doing that, because I think, let's put it this way. There's 2 million Blender users. That's a lot. That's a huge market. And I think that, we need help, and this is part of our investment, right? In terms of getting those Blender users tools, production things that could be useful, like Render Network, right? Or even Octane could be better integrated. But conversely, we've just taken cycles in Blender and put that on the render network. I think that the other part that makes Blender super interesting is because it's open source. Every research project, including a lot of the AI stuff, right? You're talking about AI that can build a scene. There's MCP, which is the interface that Anthropic created for plugging AI into applications. They use Blender, and that kind of ecosystem is invaluable. It's also unique. You just don't see that in the closed source systems that are out there. And for being honest, I mean, we started Octane with supporting 25 DCCs. About 20 of them don't really matter anymore, to be fair. A lot of them have died. I mean, they just Modo, we finally got integrated into DCC. It was, Octane's integrated in Modo, and then it got killed off a year later because they couldn't compete. We've supported as many as we can, but I do think that it is Blender's taken up a huge amount of artists, of new artists. Mind share. C40 is huge for motion graphics. Houdini is huge for what Houdini does, and then Unreal for virtual production and possibly future real-time things. Those 4 are a big component of at least Octane users' workflows, and Blender is an emergent one that I think could grow even further and more so, because it's free, and it keeps evolving pretty quickly. I mean, it's super impressive. Geometry nodes, really impressive, right, in Blender. Even the compositor is really cool. I mean, there's so many interesting things that are in there. And I will say that I have, when I was speaking at the Blender conference, Tom took me aside and we were talking about all the future stuff like AI and VR and mixed reality and just where things are heading and all this stuff. And I loved it. I mean, I think the guy he's built something incredible, and I want to support it. And I think that there's a place, for many things around Blender that could be great for Blender artists, great for the Blender Foundation, and certainly in the case where we're putting stuff out there, maybe even good for us.
Cool. Which nicely leads me to one of the subscribers' questions. When can they expect Octane add-on version for Blender? Because I believe at the moment it's a separate Blender version to be Octane.
And so we've been shipping both. So we do have an add-on version, and you can try it, and it works. People have used it. I've seen people that use only the add-on version, so it exists. And the custom version is faster. So part of what we're working on with the Blender Foundation is, can we work with you guys so we can get the pieces that are in the custom version of Blender into Blender itself, not even for Octane, but just generic API to connect to a third-party renderer. If that happens, there'll only be one version with all the benefits of the custom build and the simplicity of the add-on. But the add-on exists. It's there. It's been a lot of, we had to start from scratch doing the add-on. It wasn't even clear whether that would ever get to the speed that we wanted, but it's pretty good. And you can basically download both. So we do simultaneous releases with the custom Blender version and the add-on version. And I think that until we get something further with the Blender Foundation, the add-on version, I think, is easier for a lot of people because you can just use your normal Blender build. But they're both available. And we are obviously still supporting both until there's a better option that unifies the best of both of those.
Okay. I have to be honest, I'm not that familiar with Blender. My guys are, and they have a lot of positive feedback since last update, I believe.
Yeah.
Tons of issues were fixed, and they're super happy about using Octane on Blender. But actually, when I started to talk about Ton, what I meant is that I'm interested in people like Ton and yourself, Jules. There's not a ton of info about you as a person, if you don't mind.
No, so my background is, I was born in France. I lived there till I was 9. I don't have an accent because my parents were American, but I grew up in the countryside outside of Paris, and I loved nature. I loved the countryside, and I kind of feel like that, it does something to your brain a little bit. So when I came to America as a kid, I've been here ever since. I've been in LA ever since. I always thought I didn't think strictly as American. I would bring some of the things that I grew up with in France and that mindset and almost blend those together in creativity and just the way I thought about things. I also had a deep love of video games and programming. I was programming at 8. I got an Apple II and a Tandy 5000, and I wanted to make video games to the point where, when I was 17 and I was supposed to, I got into Harvard. My mom's dream was go to Harvard University. I got in.
That part excites me the most.
Yeah, and the funny part is that I tried for early admissions. I didn't get in, but I told them, hey, I've recreated my favorite video game, Dragon's Lair, which was a Laserdisc game. It was video. It was basically just skipping around videos, but that was mind-blowing in '83, and I rebuilt it. I created a video codec. This is 91. This is before there was QuickTime or anything, or even MPEG was a thing. It was quantized 4-bit graphics, whatever, to get it to work. And I sent them the code, and then I got in. But I realized I just want to create. I just want to, it was an interesting experience for me because in school I was taught that computer graphics weren't a big thing in the early 90s. So me doing anything with graphics or games or pushing an envelope was it was back in the days where 640K, right, was supposed to be the amount of memory you need for anything. I figured I don't think school is for me, or at least I want to take a year to do video games. And my first gig was at 18. I did a CD-ROM game for Warner Brothers called Hellcat. Did pretty well. And from there, I did a couple more video games. And I think by 96, which was a few years after I graduated high school, I wasn't going to Harvard. I wasn't going to college. And I just started what probably was a precursor to OTOY, which is a 3D video game company. And people like Charlie Wallace and Clay Sparks and Jeff Holman and Malcolm Taylor, who's no longer with OTOY, but was a co-founder. We started in the late 90s doing 3D games and rasters in a browser. And it really, that business went as far as it could. It was like my first shot at doing anything commercially right. And I wasn't the CEO. I wasn't really in charge of the business. So when I started OTOY, which, believe it or not, was in 2002. That's when I got OTOY.com. That's when I was that to me is that's when I sat down in my mom's house and I just started coding away, working on GPU ray tracing and cloud rendering and streaming and all of that stuff. And my life changed in 2004. This is part of my keynote, right? Where a man named Ari Emanuel, who is now very well known, and if you've ever seen the show Entourage, it's based on his life. He shows up on my doorstep and hears about what I'm doing, and is like, "I want to help you build a company." And I was like, "I need 2 more years." 2006 comes by. Then I've got GPU shading and ray tracing and some sort of scattering working. And he brought in David Fincher and J.J. Abrams, and I even met Jim Cameron, and it was like that was the genesis of OTOY as a business. So, but my goal was always, very simple. I wanted to create a combination of something that could be experienced as a video game, but also I loved movies. I wanted our tools to be used for movie making, and I wanted both to be the same. And I wanted those to run holographically, right? So when I talk about the holodeck and I talk about the experiences you could have with VR, it's about those things. If you look at those pieces of DNA, that describes sort of the journey from OTOY. And around 2009 was when we started to really build it out as a company. At that point, I moved, I think, into this office 2009. So it's been, it's been 16 years. I keep spacing on how long I've been here. But that was where, and within 3 years, I guess we Octane 1.0 was released. And so it's, from there, people can sort of map out the journey. But I've had a lot of other layers around that. My best friend's dad created Star Trek. I love Star Trek. I wanted to make Star Trek movies or games or things. And all of that came really almost in the last 5 years with the Roddenberry Archive project. And we ended up making little Star Trek movies, right, that are part of the immersive experience. And they got, they're beloved by Star Trek fans, which is the craziest thing for me, because that was very moving to see how people reacted to that. And of course, it's leveraging the render network. It's leveraging Octane. It's leveraging all the tools we have. So my journey is a strange one, but it's a continuous one of almost like 3 decades of just nonstop working on this stuff and trying to get to that sort of Star Trek holodeck, future of movie making, of experiences, of video games. And also, one thing I've learned, and that's sort of affected me on the way, is artists. Like when we put out Octane and people were using it to create art, that changed me. I was like, I became more than just, wasn't just about what I wanted out of the tool. It was very much about sort of experiencing Octane and the technology that we're doing and the company that we're building through the eyes of artists like yourself and many others. And I've grown as a human being because of that. And I did, by the way, in 2008, I think I mentioned this in the keynote as well, that I told Ari, I could either do AI and do a conversational, I wasn't an LLM in those days, or I could do rendering. And I picked rendering because I figured that was sooner and quicker. But here we are almost full circle where you have ChatGPT generating art because it has such great domain knowledge. And I think where AI and art sort of, converge or diverge even is such a fundamental aspect of the next year and beyond. So full circle, I guess.
It's funny, Jules. You're so spark. You sprinted through 10 of my next questions. But the reason asking about you personally is because I want people to see what kind of passion is behind the mindset at OTOY, because I don't think people talk about it a lot. But for many, getting to Harvard, for example, is achievement of their lifetime. Whereas Jules preferred to pursue his passion. And since then, you just saw yourself. He just jumped across 10 of my questions, just passionately discussing it. It's fantastic. At RenderCon, there was your beautiful family, your wife and
child,
and it's quite new for you. And I just wanted to find out, the man of your caliber, what changed in your life?
Well, everything changed.
Yeah,
for the better. First of all, being a dad is the most beautiful. I've always wanted to be a dad. I figured, at some point it would be my future, and it is. And he's my child's almost 18 months now. Some people might know this because I wasn't able to attend one of the talks I was supposed to give in November of 23. But it's been beautiful. It's been an adjustment. I've in this office where I've been, it was after 16 years, I lived in the office. I lived in this tiny little room for 14 of those last 16 years. And I moved out of it finally, obviously, not even because of our job, but just because I wanted to build a family. And my wife and I we're so blessed. And we love being parents. And I've definitely worked as much as I can to try to find a better work-life balance. But I will say that, when you see a little life grow and learn in front of your very eyes, there's nothing like that, right? Nothing. And of course, it's an experience that most people in the world have in some form or other had, but it's new to me. And I genuinely I just feel so much joy from that. And I think I've successfully tried to balance, my responsibilities to everything we're doing and being a dad and a husband. And it's been amazing.
Congratulations and welcome to the club, sir.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I'll just check my list if I have anything, because honestly, you just answered all the questions. And
great.
subscribers' questions, my questions. We had questions from subscribers about will Octane support AMD and Intel GPUs. Jules answered that question. It was supported, and there is no plan to support AMD and Intel right now.
Yeah, not right now. Yeah.
Yeah, because OTOY is in a sweet spot. I agree.
It takes a lot of resources, and I don't even know where Intel's at with. I mean, like, it's funny. I don't know if you can still film it, but Raja Gadori, who was the head of AMD GPUs when I started with AMD, became the head of Intel GPUs, then left. And it's like, I mean, it's just Intel's in not a great place. It's a question of simply what if there was an API that was like DirectX that was usable for this kind of stuff we do with Octane that worked across the board everywhere, as well as Metal does. Like Metal on Intel and AMD worked great. That's why we were able to ship Octane on AMD and Intel GPUs. It's Apple that dropped support for AMD and Intel hardware. And with that, we lost support for Intel and AMD hardware because Apple didn't care. And AMD couldn't, and Intel didn't give us drivers that were at the level of CUDA or Metal. So, it's a driver level issue more than it is even the hardware.
It's a really hard balancing game, with all the infrastructure, so many players. Well, not that many players, but still. Apple,
yeah, I mean, we could do it. I just feel like listen, I mean, I've spent a lot of time, I mean, even people are digging me for like, oh, you're spending too much time on this feature versus this or that. I think that we spent a lot of time supporting AMD and Intel GPUs, and we did it, and we shipped it before anyone else. Like, we had AMD, and Apple Silicon and Intel all working in 2020. This is like 5 years ago, right? And I'm very proud of that. But I just don't think those, I mean, if you look at even where Apple's, that was their market, right? I mean, it wasn't like, AMD GPUs were that competitive with NVIDIA. Frankly, they weren't on the graphics side. And I don't know, honestly, how much they still are. But when Apple was like, we have a better GPU than any of these things, and you guys should support that. I mean, that's the message of just Apple Silicon in general, right? I mean, that was a signal to me of like, let's just double down on supporting Metal, which is now Apple Silicon, and CUDA. And what's in between? I mean, there's ROCm from AMD, and there's like, whatever, Intel had their thing. But the drivers and everything are tricky. And when we talk about support and we're talking about users pushing those GPUs to the limit, I need to see the kind of support that we're getting from NVIDIA or an Apple. And I love the AMD guys, but they also it's changed a lot over the years. Intel's also had upheaval. So I think that we'll see how things play out. And we're always able, I mean, it's not like we can't support those two hardware vendors we have. It's just what operating system, what drivers, what framework. And that's something where it's there's a lot of work that would be done there that I think could be used elsewhere for now. It doesn't mean we can't go do it later.
Cool. I think I asked all the questions. Thank you for everything you're doing.
You for saying that.
I genuinely hope you keep sparking.
Well, I plan to do this till the end of my life. Like, I mean, this is a life journey. It's not even a journey. It is my life. Like, I've been doing this since I was a child, practically, and I've not stopped since I was a teenager. Right? In this journey towards it. Even though OTOY didn't exist in the '90s, for me, the work I was doing even in '91 or something as a teenager just feels like it just led to this place, and until I run out of energy or health or whatever, I want to keep doing this as long as I can.
Thank you so much, and keep being passionate as you are.
My pleasure. Thank you.